Now, US President Donald Trump has ramped up his tariff war against India.
He signed an executive order imposing an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, and this pushes the total tariff wall on India to a staggering 50%. This executive order will be implemented 21 days after signing, which means it is effective from the 27th of August.
Now, India has sent a stern message on Trump's additional tariff announcement. In a statement, India's Ministry of External Affairs said that these actions are unfair, unjustified and unreasonable, adding that India will take all actions necessary to protect its national interests.
And this major escalation comes just hours after Trump warned of a very substantial hike within 24 hours. India has already faced stiff 25% duties, and this latest action is seen as a direct blow to bilateral trade ties between India and the US. And this is after calling India a friend just last week. Trump struck a completely different tone on Monday.
Now, he accused New Delhi of helping fund Russia's war in Ukraine by continuing to buy Russian oil, saying India does not care how many people are dying in Ukraine.
This happened, and this hardened rhetoric marks a serious shift in the US-India relations that have been growing from strength to strength so far. India has remained firm on its Russian oil import regardless of the tariffs being imposed, and Prime Minister Modi has consistently said that this is not an era of war. India's foreign ministry, while defending New Delhi's oil purchases as a matter of national interest, and Indian officials have called out the West's hypocrisy, pointing out to Europe's own massive imports from Russia, especially in energy. President Trump has had little to say, and when he was asked about the reports of the US itself being a big importer of Russian uranium, fertilizers, palladium and chemicals.
India says that the US imports Russian uranium, chemicals, fertilizers, while criticizing their energy imports. Your response to that, sir?
I don't know anything about it. I'd have to check, but we'll get back to you on that.
India, now the world's fourth largest economy and third largest oil consumer, has said the tariffs are unjustified and unfair. New Delhi made it clear that it will take all necessary steps to protect its economy and its security.
Even within the US, there is discomfort. Republican leader Nikki Haley warned, don't give China a pass and burn a relationship with a strong ally like India. Criticism has also come from across the political aisle, questioning Trump's strategy of alienating a key democratic partner in Asia. India also politely but firmly rejected Trump's repeated claims that he brokered a ceasefire in last year's India-Pakistan standoff, reminding Washington of its sovereign foreign policy.
All right, to discuss this further, we are joined by Robert Coeb from Los Angeles. He is a director at Asia Pacific Geoeconomics and Business Initiative, Chapman University. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you.
Now, what we're seeing playing out seems right out of Trump's standard playbook. There seems to be a lot of pressure. There seems to be almost some sort of hostility now when it comes to tariffs and the talks that were ongoing between India and the United States. How do you see things progressing? Because as we mentioned earlier as well, India has given a measured and guarded response to this earlier this week as well. It was a 6-point response. What's your take on this?
Well, I think that's a good starting point. As you said, sort of measured, cautious response. I think it's true that, in fact, the U.S. president does appreciate his relationship with Narendra Modi, your prime minister. So there's a lot to work with there. Right now, he's decided to come down hard on the oil imports from Russia. If he were really being more even-handed about this, he'd go after China. But he's in the midst of trying to strike a big trade deal with them. I would say this is perhaps temporary. I mean, I'm not saying it won't take effect as expected on the 27th, but there's room to still discuss things, put it that way. And I would encourage India to continue the sort of actions it's taking, which again are measured and cautious, and then try to look for some opening gambit to entice Trump away from the tariffs.
Robert, if we were to just look at the consequences of these moves that are coming out from the US president, 50% is where he's reached as of now. But if you just juxtapose that with the way China and Brazil have been responding to his tariff threats so far, China said they're going to fight it out till the end. And of course, they are standing very, very firm. Do you feel these moves by the US president are only going to make the BRICS grouping a more tight-knit group? Which again is a threat to Trump?
Yeah. Well, of course, India is a key component of the BRICS, but it's, you know, the general impression is that it's really pushed forward by China. Russia cheers it a lot. India is definitely a key component, but it is the most U.S. friendly and Western oriented among that grouping. So again, that's a good opportunity for India to capitalize on. I would say it should resist that push that will likely come from countries like China and Russia. Brazil, yes, is also in the mix, but geopolitically, it's not as critical. The real key players in BRICS are the C, the I, and the R. And India is the most likely, I should say, to find a welcoming reception both in Washington and Brussels and with other democratic nations where it can still build a lot of positive trade relationships.
And that only goes to say about what India's foreign policy, how great it has been across the world so far in times which are so hostile.
Right, and now just to talk about that again, and if I could just take what Shivan said a point further, we're also seeing how it's playing out with different nations as well, right? And we were speaking to some of the experts earlier who were saying that this is not an issue that is exclusive to India. There are other nations who've gone through the same process with the United States. They may have reached a deal. India is not there yet. That being said, we are seeing this sort of duplicity play out when it comes to EU's trade with Russia. We're seeing this with China. Why do you think Trump is choosing to have take a different approach when it comes to India?
I would have to say, based on the suddenness of this, you had the Prime Minister from India visiting only in February, hosted by our president, and things seemed great then. It's only been recently that this has become an issue. So I have a feeling that it's coming down to he really wants to see a peace deal for Ukraine, which I think everyone should support. Unfortunately, it seems, going after what looks like the most tempting target for leverage, which happens to be India, which isn't really a smart way to approach it, but it's what plays to his psychology of strong-arming even partners. But along those lines, because he does still see, I believe, India as a partner, and indeed the two countries, regardless of who's running the show in Washington, there's so much positive interactions, and they are you've got the world's largest democracy in terms of GDP, the United States, and the world's largest democracy in terms of population and rising GDP, already a top 5 GDP player, India. There's just a lot of synergy there, and that's where the two sides should focus on and still try to repair the damage that's been done, which I don't think is too significant, because right now it is more in the space of rhetoric. We'll have to see what happens on the 27th, but there's still a chance to salvage a more positive trading relationship.
Right, and if I may just seek more clarity there, we do know Trump's election campaign promise was to end this war within 24 hours. It was then 100 days.
Yeah.
We've seen how things have played out on that front. And by that, I mean nothing has played out significantly, at least. That being said, do you perhaps feel that at this point, Trump may be looking for a win? And perhaps that's why this is how we're seeing this play out so suddenly with India as well?
I think that's a good observation. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, by the way, keep in mind, he berated President Zelensky, who visited the White House around the time that Prime Minister Modi did. And you know, he went from calling him a dictator and saying he had no cards, that is President Zelensky, to now really coming on the side of Ukraine in the conflict. And I think he's just looking for pressure points to exert, because the U.S. has already sanctioned Russia. It hasn't really figured out a viable strategy. I think, unfortunately, he's turning to kind of a friend in the general geopolitical mix. And it's not a very smart play, but I think that's the logic perhaps behind it. And in that sense, if India were to come back and say, look, there are other ways we can help end this war. There are other ways we can work with America. You shouldn't be targeting us for oil, which, by the way, is under the cap. The whole thing on Russian oil is there's a price cap of $60 a barrel. And India buys below that. So it's actually not in violation of anything. It's just Trump was looking at the trade statistics. It saw after China was the largest importer of Russian oil and decided to go after India for that reason. But I don't think there's anything else to it other than he's looking for a way to pressure Russia to stop the war.
And Robert, of course, when Trump was questioned about U.S. imports from Russia, there was no response which came. He said he'll need to check on that, and that was the end of that. So I'll leave it at what you said.
Yeah, I don't think he knows. That's the whole thing. I think that was a very intelligent question asked to a man who doesn't pay attention to those details.
No, and it did highlight a lot for the entire world to see. But thanks so much for joining us on World DNA, and I'll leave it at what you said, that let talks continue. 27th August, which is just 4 days before Modi makes his way to China after 6 years. So it's interesting times. While our NSA is in Moscow, and so is Steve Witkoff. So a lot of developments. We'd love to have you on the show again.
A lot to follow. I hope to be available and would love to join.